Hi, everybody. Welcome to English Digest. I'm Stephanie.
I am Tom.
Hey, it's our literature unit, and we're really focusing on a classic of literature. By Charles Dickens, it's called A Tale of Two Cities. And it's filled with things like life, death, and sacrifice. Now, in day one, we talked about the plot. We've got Jarvis Lorry. He's a banker, and he wants to reunite an old friend of his, Dr. Manette, with his daughter, who had thought her dad was dead already. So he goes to Paris, he reunites them, and Lucy discovers where her father has been all those years that he was gone. He's been in prison. He's now out. He had been held captive in Bastille prison, which is in France, and it was a very secure prison. But, after 18 years in a really kind of scary prison, and prison back in those days in the 1800s, actually the book is based in 1700s, it was bad news. The prisons today are kind of a picnic, a hotel compared to what they used to be long ago. Well, he needs to his mind needs to be restored. He has forgotten a lot of his life. So Lucy's helped him, but he's been, of course, scarred by the experience, not just physically, but mentally scarred by it. Well, we find out that they go ahead and they move home to England, and 5 years later, Dr. Manette and his daughter get involved in a case. It's a trial of a guy named Charles Darnay, and Darnay's been accused of being a spy, but he's actually a French noble. He's an aristocrat, you could say, and he's turned his back on his blood, his family. He said, I don't want to live with those noblemen. So he turned his back on the aristocracy. He didn't like what they were doing. Aristocracy, of course, is kings, queens, dukes, duchesses, those people who are born wealthy and born with power. Well, he's acquitted, or he's let go at the end of the trial because he was not guilty, thanks to the intervention of Sidney Carton, who looks exactly like Darnay. And he helps give evidence that lets Darnay be acquitted. So then Darnay and Lucy fall in love, and they get married. And meantime, this Sidney Carton, who helped Darnay get off at the trial, he's not a great guy. He's an alcoholic, and he's kind of a scoundrel, or a lowlife, as Tom would say. But he falls in love with Lucy, and he tells Lucy he loves her, but he knows that she can never love him back. She goes ahead and marries her dreamboat, and that would be Charles Darnay. But one day we're going to find out that Sidney Carton can do something for the love of his life, Lucy.
That's right. He wants to do something for her even though he knows he's not worthy of being together with her. And I suppose that's going to be something that will happen in the future. And we'll probably talk about that in today's program as we continue to summarize A Tale of Two Cities. So let's get to it, everybody. Let's listen to the contents of today's lesson, and then we'll come back to break it down for you.
Jarvis Lorry travels to Paris to help the branch of his bank there. Darnay also returns to protect one of his family's servants. However, Darnay is arrested as a suspected traitor to France. Confined to prison, he fears he'll be executed, like many other nobles. Dr. Manette and Lucy then arrive in Paris. As a survivor of the Bastille, Dr. Manette is regarded as a hero by the revolutionaries. He overcomes the terrible memories of his time in prison, becomes an influential figure, and secures Darnay's release. However, Darnay is arrested again, and one of his accusers is Dr. Manette himself. Years ago, Dr. Manette became aware of dreadful crimes committed by Darnay's father and uncle. When he reported these to the authorities, the brothers had him thrown in the Bastille. There, Dr. Manette wrote and concealed a letter denouncing the whole family, including their descendants. The letter has been recovered, and with this piece of evidence, Darnay is condemned to death. Carton unexpectedly shows up in Paris. Motivated by his old promise to Lucy, he threatens a prison guard to allow him to switch places with Darnay. As they are identical, nothing is suspected. Darnay flees Paris with his family and Laurie, while Carton is voluntarily executed in his place. In the moments before his death, Carton imagines Lucy, Darnay, and their children living happily. He thinks to himself, "It is a far, far better thing that I do than I have ever done. It is a far, far better rest that I go to than I have ever known."
Okay, let's continue to summarize A Tale of Two Cities. Remember at the beginning of our explanation last time we were talking about Jarvis Lorry, the banker, and remember he had taken Lucy to Paris to meet up with her father, to reunite with him, and then they all moved back to England, and then other things happened after that, but we won't get into those details right now. But Jarvis Lorry is now going back to Paris, and in this particular on this particular trip, he needs to help the branch of his bank there. Remember, he's a banker, and banks have branch offices in various locations, so he's going to help out with something at the branch there. And Darnay also returns to protect one of his family's servants. So these people all know each other now, and we've got Dr. Darnay, and he also goes back to France because he's going to protect one of his family's servants. Evidently, one of the servants got in trouble, so Darnay is going back there to protect that servant.
Right. Remember, Darnay is actually a nobleman. So noble people, or the aristocracy, all had servants. They didn't have to work. Remember, they were born rich. They were born with lots of land and servants and things like that. So Darnay is a good guy. He goes back to Paris to help one of his servants that used to work for his family. However, he's arrested by the police because they suspect him as being a traitor to France. So, if you know this period of history, you know that anyone who was a nobleman or part of the royalty or aristocracy, they were in danger because the people of France rose up and wanted to kill them all. They wanted to get rid of all of those noble people who had made their lives difficult. They wanted everyone to be equal. They wanted freedom. They wanted liberty. So he's confined to prison. If you're confined somewhere, it just means you're put somewhere and you have no ability to get out or no freedom to leave. We often talk about being confined to prison, or here's another one. Sometimes you're confined to bed because your health is really poor and you can't get up and walk around. So to confine to someone or be confined somewhere just means you're restricted to that one little area. It limits your activities and your movement.
Right, and it's often used in the past voice, the passive voice, to be confined to prison, and so he has to stay in prison, basically. And back then, of course, they had the death penalty, and the French people loved the guillotine, that device that cuts off your head. So, of course, when he was in prison, he feared that he would be executed like many other nobles. So that's what happened back then. Of course, they didn't like the nobles. They did not like the aristocracy. They were killing them left and right, and because he had been a noble, they found out about that, and he thought he would be executed. And Dr. Manette and Lucy then arrive in Paris. Now, as a survivor of the Bastille, Dr. Manette is regarded as a hero by the revolutionaries. So, yes, Dr. Manette and his daughter Lucy, they arrive in Paris, and, of course, he is a survivor of the Bastille. Remember, he was in there, and I suppose it was very rare that people actually survived being in there.
Well, usually you got sick and died
Yeah, got sick and died, or you were beaten up and killed or whatever.
Horrible.
So he actually survived it. So he's respected there by the revolutionaries. He's regarded as a hero, and revolutionaries, of course, are people who are revolting against the government. So you could say the Americans were revolutionaries against the British during the American Revolution.
Oh, yeah. So he's back there in prison. Lucy and her dad, Dr. Manette, go over there to Paris to see what they can do. And because Dr. Manette is regarded as a hero by the real people on the street, the revolutionaries, he's able to get Darnay's release. So it says here, Dr. Manette overcomes the terrible memories of his time in prison. If you overcome something, you successfully get past it, maybe by controlling a feeling you have, or maybe a problem that was facing you. You overcame that difficulty, you got past it, and were able to move ahead. So he overcomes the terrible memories of his time in prison, which probably were awful, and he becomes an influential figure, someone who has influence, has power, and through that power, he tells the prison guards he wants Darnay released.
Right, so he's able to deal with his problems and deal with his terrible memories of that time in prison. He's influential, and he's therefore able to secure Darnay's release. However, Darnay is arrested again, and one of his accusers is Dr. Manette himself. Interesting. So Darnay got out of prison. He's no longer confined to prison, but then he has to go back in because Dr. Manette accused him of something else. Boy, that's not a really nice thing to do, is it?
We're going to find out more about this, guys, but first we're going to take a quick break and listen to our Chinese teacher.
听众朋友大家好，我是安娜。我们昨天带大家开始看《双城记》这个文学巨擘。好，我们先复习一下昨天提到什么样的故事情节。基本上《双城记》呢，就是围绕着 Dr. Manette 这一家人。那么 Dr. Manette 之前呢，在巴士底监狱关了16年，因为某种原因。那么他的女儿 Lucy Manette 就被他的好朋友 Digest Lorry 一个银行家收养了。那后来终于出狱了之后呢，因为在有一个审判当中，审判的主角是这个 Charles Darnay 在这个审判当中作证，然后呢 Lucy 跟 Darnay 呢就相恋了，后来还结婚。好，故事讲到这边，我们今天来看之后又发生什么事情呢？之后啊，这个银行家 Digest Lorry 就要到这个巴黎去帮助他那边的银行分行做一些事情。那么 Darnay 呢，也就是 Lucy 的老公，刚好有回到法国，要保护他的家里面其中一个家仆。我们知道后来法国大革命发生了嘛。那么然而呢，因为 Darnay 啊，他涉嫌叛逃法国，在法国的巴黎又被捕了耶。那因为当时他被囚禁在监狱啊，就担心自己会像很多其他的贵族一样会被处决，会被处死，所以 Dr. Manette 就跟 Lucy 一起来到了巴黎，那么把他 Darnay 给救出来。不过呢，当时的这个 Dr. Manette 因为他是曾经被关在巴士底监狱，他算是一个幸存者，所以当时被革命者呢是视为英雄。而他自己也克服了在狱中当中很可怕的回忆，在当时就成为一个有影响力的人哦，而且 Darnay 也真的被释放了。不过故事的情节有很严重的反转，因为 Darnay 又被捕了，重点是他的 accusers 指控者之一居然就是他的丈人 Dr. Manette。
We're going to take a quick break. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Welcome back, guys. We're talking about A Tale of Two Cities and the plot. Day 1 was focused on the plot only, and then day 2, we're continuing to talk about the plot.
However, it says here, Darnay is arrested again, and one of his accusers is Dr. Manette himself, which just doesn't sound very nice. Dr. Manette, of course, was the father of Lucy, and Lucy married Darnay, but now I guess the accuser is his father-in-law, right?
Yeah, but it was from long ago. So don't think that Dr. Manette just suddenly said, hey, I want this Darnay guy arrested again, even though I just got him out of prison. Nope. Here's the story. Years ago, Dr. Manette became aware of dreadful crimes committed by Darnay's father and uncle. Not by Darnay, but by his father and uncle. Now, this was before Dr. Manette was put into prison, so this was a long time ago. Now, dreadful just means horrible, awful, dreadful. We use it sometimes to talk about bad weather. Or you could say, oh, today my hair looks dreadful. So just awful. So what were those crimes? We don't really know in this particular article, but they were bad. So he went to the authorities. The authorities are people that have some sort of power. Usually when you talk about the authorities, they're people in the government or the policemen that have that are in charge of your country. And he went to the authorities, probably the leaders of the government, and he said what he'd found. And the brothers, Darnay's father and uncle, were thrown in the Bastille. So they were thrown into prison.
Right, so again, he tried to report this crime, or these crimes that he found out about those two brothers. He tried to report those crimes to the authorities, and then the brothers had him thrown into the Bastille for trying to report those crimes. There, Dr. Manette wrote and concealed a letter denouncing the whole family, including their descendants. So, as you might expect, Dr. Manette was quite upset about being thrown in the Bastille, so he wrote a letter and he concealed it. If you conceal something, you hide it so no one else can see it, so no one else can find it. So he had a concealed letter, and that letter was denouncing the whole family. If you denounce someone, you just say that they're bad, you say that they've done bad things, and that they should not be respected by anybody else.
Yeah, usually when you see that word denounce, it's used to say that you're expressing these strong opinions about someone in public, too. So, yeah, when he went to the authorities, Dr. Manette probably thought that the brothers would be arrested, Darnay's father and uncle, but instead, he gets thrown into prison himself. So while he was in prison, I can see being angry. So he sat down and wrote this letter and concealed it or hid it. That's what conceal means, to hide something. Talking about the family's crimes and how even the whole family was guilty. And even their descendants. So even though it was Darnay's father and uncle who had committed the crimes, Dr. Manette thought the whole family should be punished. I'm sure he forgot about this when his daughter Lucy married Darnay. So anyway, the letter has been found, or here our article says has been recovered. And with this piece of evidence, Darnay is once again arrested and condemned to death. If you condemn somebody, you are saying you're going to give them a really severe punishment after you decide they're guilty of something. And if someone, a criminal, has been found guilty and they're condemned to death, that's the death penalty. Well, he's condemned to death.
Right, and you hear countries using this word all the time. If America says something bad about China, then China condemns America, and vice versa. They condemn each other all the time. They say they've done a horrible thing and they should apologize and stuff like that. It goes back and forth all the time. But in this particular case, it's talking about a crime. So yes, he is sentenced or condemned to death. He's going to have to go to the guillotine. And Carton unexpectedly shows up in Paris. So remember, Carton is kind of Darnay's double. He's his look-alike. He's his doppelganger, as we sometimes say. Basically, he unexpectedly is in Paris now. We don't know why he's there. Maybe he went down there to get some good bargains on some crepe Suzette or some filet mignon or something, or some wine or something. So he's in Paris, and motivated by his old promise to Lucy, he threatens a prison guard to allow him to switch places with Darnay. So remember, Carton said that, well, Lucy, I know I'm not worthy of you. I can never marry you because I'm an alcoholic scoundrel. I know that, but still, I'd like to do something for you someday. And so he's motivated by that old promise. If you're motivated, it gives you reason to do something. So he remembered that he made her that promise that he wants to do something for her. So because of that promise, he threatens a prison guard to allow him to switch places with Darnay. That's quite a noble sacrifice there.
Yeah, and it's interesting, too. Remember, he's a scoundrel, and what does he do? He threatens a prison guard. So he probably says to the prison guard, you either let me switch places or I'll kill you. So he's a scoundrel to the end, but wow, what a sacrifice. So he knows that if he switches places, that he will be the one who is put to death. He's the one who will be killed. So as they are identical, if you're identical with someone, you look exactly like them. We often use it to talk about identical twins, which is always fun. I know a couple of sets of identical twins. Sometimes you can tell them apart and sometimes you can't. These two men who were not twins still were identical. They looked exactly alike. So Darnay, after he's allowed to switch places with Carton, flees or leaves Paris as fast as he can with his family. And his friend Laurie, remember, Laurie Jarvis. Laurie is the banker. But while they leave and they flee Paris, where is Sidney Carton? Well, he's in the Bastille prison, and he is voluntarily executed in Darnay's place. So voluntarily means you did it because you wanted to. No one forced you. You did it of your own free will. If you're a volunteer, you might work for an organization like a charity for free, which is nice. Or maybe you volunteer at the hospital. Voluntarily, of course, though, is the adverb form. To voluntarily do something because you want to and not because somebody else forces you to.
Yep, you did it as a volunteer. You volunteered. You did it voluntarily. And Carton, again, voluntarily let himself be executed. He was killed in prison there. And in the moments before his death, Carton imagines Lucy, Darnay, and their children living happily. So, yeah, I suppose that happens before you die, before you're condemned to death. You will imagine things, or your whole life will flash before your eyes. And he imagined Lucy, Darnay, and their children living happily. So I guess he thinks his sacrifice was worth it.
Well, there's a quote by Carton at the end where it says he thinks to himself, and it's sort of old-fashioned language, old-fashioned English. But you know when you read this that he feels like he's made a wonderful choice, a good decision. He feels like a lot of his life has been horrible, that he should have been punished, but now he feels like he's redeemed himself. We're going to talk about that in day 3, but this is what he says. He says, it is a far, far better thing that I do than I have ever done. This is the best thing he's ever done in his whole life. That's what he means. And then he says, it is a far, far better rest that I go to than I have ever known. So he knows he's going to heaven, and heaven, of course, is a much better place to be than earth, where a lot of people have difficulties and hardships and things to overcome. So he's happy that he's done this, and it was truly a great sacrifice. Right now, we're going to listen one more time to our Chinese teacher, and then we have to wrap it up. We're out of time.
为什么会发生这种事呢？原来在好多年前 Dr. Manette 当时因为发现了 Darnie， 也就是他的女婿，当时他发现了 Darnie 的爸爸跟叔叔犯下一些残忍的罪行，然后就向当局呢去报案。报案的时候呢，居然没有报案成功，而且反而这对兄弟呢把他扔进监狱了。所以其实他到监狱去，他是被陷害的。好，我们来看一下第二段的第一句，有一个简化的关系子句哦。先行词是中间 dreadful crimes 恐怖的罪行，后面的 committed 一直到句尾可以左右括号。committed 前面省略的是关带 which 或 that 跟 were 这个 be 动词。好，也就是说 Dr. Manette 为什么会在巴士底监狱被关了18年，其实根本就是因为自己女婿他的父亲跟叔叔把他陷害进去的。那为什么 Darnie 又会再次被逮捕呢？因为当时Dr. Manette 他在监狱当中，他就写了一个信，这封信呢把它藏起来，这封信呢把所有当时残忍的罪行都揭发，并且谴责 Darnie 整个家族，包括后裔，也就是包括他自己的女婿。我们来看一下第二段，也就是我刚刚提到的文意，这是在第3句的地方。先行词是 a letter， 后面有一个省略的简化的关系子句，从 denouncing 一直到句尾的地方。当然这个 denouncing 原本应该是 that 或者是 which denounced， 当我们把关带删掉之后，后面的 denounced 就会变成动词 ing。 好，那么括号里面最后一个字的 descendant 后代在这里特别指的就是他自己的女婿 Darnie。 所以为什么 Darnie 被他救了，但是后来又被捕呢？而且这个 Darnie 的丈人居然是他的指控者之一耶。不过因为这封信后来也被找到，也证实了，所以 Darnie 就被判处死刑了。怎么办呢？该怎么救呢？居然出现了 Carton 这个律师，大家还记得吧？这个律师呢，在故事当中我们特别有注意到 Carton 跟 Darnie 两个人长得一模一样。好， Carton 因为意外的出现在巴黎，而且因为他记得他自己对 Lucy当时有一个承诺，也就是因为他很爱 Lucy， 他希望能够做一件这个很伟大的事情，为 Lucy 而做，所以他就威胁其中一个狱卒呢，让他跟 Darnie 调换位置，也就是让 Darnie 出来，让 Carton 进去。我们来看一下最后这一段第2句，有一个分词构句哦。分词构句本来省略的是 because， 因为 he is， 这个 he 呢指的就是 Carton， 因为 Carton 被 motivated by his old promise to Lucy， 把连接词 because 删了， he is 也删了。那么在这样子的一个承诺的激励之下呢，就做了一个调换位置的动作。而因为他们长得一模一样，第3句第一个字的 as 是连接词 because 的意思，所以呢没有人发现，没什么可疑的。所以 Darnie 逃出来之后呢，就跟他的家人一起逃离了巴黎，而 Carton 就替代他被处决了。在他临死前一刻， Carton 还想着 Lucy、Darnie 跟他们的孩子快乐的生活，而且他心里还想着他现在做的事情比过去的事情更美好，而现在死后要休息，远比过去的还更加安详。我们明天会对双城记做更多的讨论。我是安娜，我们明天见。
That's it for today, everybody. We hope you enjoyed our summary of A Tale of Two Cities, and we hope you are inspired to read the book yourself. But we're going to actually analyze the book in our next lesson. We're going to talk about some of the themes and ideas in the book, and maybe you will still give yourself this challenge, although most of Charles Dickens' books are quite long, and the language is a little difficult, but I'm sure you can handle it. From all of us here at English Digest, I'm Tom.
I'm Stephanie.
Goodbye.
Bye.